Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing today? My name is Chris Curry. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Horticulture, and I'm also an extension horticulturist. I normally work with commercial greenhouse growers, but I'm a gardener just like others as well. So today we're going to talk about one of the best things that you can be doing with your free time now, and that is starting seeds for gardening. There's a couple different ways that we can start seeds, and we're going to cover how to sow pepper seed and how to sow squash seed. This is going to represent both a small seeded species and a large seeded species. So if you're working with something else like tomato, you can go ahead and use these same guidelines that we're talking about for pepper, as well as other cucurbits, cucumbers, summer squash. You can use the same technique with the large seeded variety. So we're going to go over two ways to do it, and that is going to be one, how we would do it commercially, and two, how you might be able to do it in your home, apartment, or other dwelling. So first, start with seed. It's actually been quite an exciting spring for seed growers or seed sellers. They've been pretty busy, and in some cases they've had to restrict the amount of seed they can sell because other people think that gardening is a pretty great idea, especially growing vegetables during this time. So we've got our large seeded squash and our small seeded pepper. So we're going to start with the commercial method of sowing seed. And what we've got here are what we call flats or trays. And they're these hollow trays where we've got these thin plastic inserts that will have different numbers of plants. You can see here, these inserts have 4 plants per pack. We call this a 4-pack. Here we've got another 4-pack, but you can see that the size of these cells are going to be a little bit larger. So we're going to use the appropriately sized cell for the different seedling. We're going to put the squash in the large cell and the pepper in the smaller cell. So one of the first things you can do, especially with the small seeded varieties, is you can get the soil wet before you plant. That way you avoid getting this seed buried too far down. Let me step out and just get some water real quick. I'll be right back. I've got my water now. Like I was saying, with small seeded species, you can start out by getting the surface of your soilless growing substrate wet. Now you heard me call it soilless growing substrate. That's because it is not dirt. Instead, what we're growing in is a mixture of primarily ground sphagnum peat moss and then little chunks of perlite. You also might have a mix that's got some little gold flecks, which is vermiculite. You want to be sure that you use soilless substrate, or as it's named at the big box stores, a potting mix. Do not use garden soil. Garden soil contains mineral soil. It's not going to drain well for you in these small containers. You want to make sure that you get the soilless growing mix. And again, this is a commercial bag, but you can find the identical product at your local home improvement stores, which right now are still open in Iowa. So we still have access to those materials. Once you've got your soil or your growing substrate pre-moistened, I tap seeds out into my hand to make them easier to grab. Some people use the tweezers. I prefer to just use my fingers. Now when you're sowing them, you want to try and get the seed in the middle of the cell. The reason why you want to try and get that seed in the middle of this cell, oops, I had a second seed there. Let me get that over in this one. You want to get the seed in the middle of the cell because that will give it the optimum amount of growing space, as opposed to having 2 seedlings crowded that might crowd each other out. By centering them, it doesn't just look nice, it actually gives the seedling the most space possible. So you go through and you seed the entire tray. If we were doing this commercially, we would have a machine called a vacuum seeder that would pick up an entire row of seeds and then drop them down with a vacuum. So anyways, that's how you'd go about sowing that small seeded species. Put the excess seeds or the extras back in your packet, seal it up. Let's move over to that big seed. So when you have a large seeded plant that you're growing, sowing's a little bit different. First of all, it's easier to handle the seed. There you can see these are noticeably larger. You can pre-moisten the growing media, just like you did with the other flat, but you don't have to with these because these seeds won't fall as deep down and get buried. Generally speaking, you want to bury the seed about to the depth of the size of the seed. Those peppers weren't very big, so we can just sprinkle some growing substrate on them when we're done sowing. But we can't just do the same with these seeds. They're pretty large. So instead we're going to dibble a hole. You could use your pinky finger and go through and dibble a hole, but what works better is something like the fat end of a chopstick. Go through, dibble your hole, drop your seed in. I always like to double check to make sure that I got a seed in every hole. And then, once you've got your entire flat zone, just give it a shake like that to cover it back up. And you're good to go. Okay, so that's using the commercial flats. What happens if you can't find these handy-dandy trays and inserts? Well, one of the things you've likely been buying in your limited grocery store runs is eggs. I know we're going through a lot in my house. You can turn a simple egg carton into a growing tray. So what I've done here is I've just ripped an egg carton in half, and I filled it with some of that soilless growing mix. Use the same kind of soilless substrate that you would use in a flat in the egg carton. Similar rules apply. For the small seeded species, hoisting down the substrate. Sow your seed. Again, for the small seeded species, you can just sprinkle a little potting media over the seed. And go ahead. Small seeded species are ready to go. Similarly, for large seeded species, dibble a hole, put your cells. Put your large seed. Shake. These are a little bit smaller, so you might want to add just a little bit on top for these to make sure that you get it covered well. And then, put these on a windowsill or some area that gets good light, or if you have some fluorescent shop lights, those also work really well. You can put them about 6 to 8 inches above the seedling, and they'll help you grow. Now, what's going to happen? They're going to germinate, they're going to start to grow. They're going to get big for this container pretty quickly. What you're going to want to do is with some of that same soilless growing media, get a larger container, and then just transplant your plants up as needed while they're growing inside. Because they're not going to be able to stay in a container the size of one of these eggs until it's time to plant. You'll have to bump them up into larger containers probably at least once, and not maybe twice, depending on when we can finally get out and plant our garden. So, while I was gardening alone today, if you happen to find yourself gardening around others, make sure to follow the appropriate safety techniques. Feel free to don a mask. It's not a bad idea even when working with these peat-based substrates in general, just because of the loose particulates. Gloves, also handy to keep sanitary, as well as some sort of wipe or disinfecting product to clean any surfaces that you are going to use or that you did use during your potting up. So hopefully this gets you a start with your garden, and hopefully we'll be growing soon enough here. Take care, stay safe, and stay healthy.